Certainly, I think we all start with muscle and we think about mobility and we think about athletes. But certainly as we get older, our functional mobility is a big issue. I always like to, make people aware that, for people who get beyond 60, 65, one of the major problems with long-term health is falls and breaking fractures and things. There are 300,000 hip fractures per year in the United States, and one third of those people never leave the hospital. So mobility and becoming more frail and all that is a major issue for keeping muscles healthy. So that's certainly part of it. And related to that, I think one of the things people don't understand is that we're continuously rebuilding our muscle proteins. Every protein in the body has a finite lifetime, and we have to make somewhere between 250 and 300 grams of new protein per day. And so people think, well, I'm eating 65 or 100 or 165 grams of protein, but I still have to make 300. So that sort of says, metabolism is more complex than just, I eat 100 grams of protein and therefore I make 100. I mean, that's not how it works. So, I think that whole process is critical. That leads us into the metabolism. Muscle makes up, somewhere around 45% of our body weight and a huge amount of protein. It's very involved in each of the macronutrients. So protein, carbohydrate, and fat are all heavily metabolized there. And I think it's important that we think about each of them. Just from a standpoint of protein, since I started with that, we're making 250, 300 grams of protein per day. Only about 25% of that actually goes to muscle. The rest of it's for organs. And the organs always have a first priority. And so muscle is sort of the second priority at a meal. And that's why the meals become very important. And so we have that constant turnover. People often will talk about thermogenesis, or how much when you eat, and protein has a higher thermogenic rate. If you read freshman nutrition, it'll say, well, it's because it's harder to digest and absorb. And that's not it at all. The issue is muscle protein turnover is a very expensive process. And so that's all part of the meal regulation. So that's kind of a long winded answer there, but we could come back to that. The other part, carbohydrate and fat, muscle is really a central part of metabolism of both carbohydrates and fat. So people who have insulin resistance begins in muscle. Muscle basically has a need for carbohydrates, but really only for high end muscle performance. The basic fuel for muscle is actually fats. And so when we think about regulation of blood glucose and fatty acids, it all begins in muscle. If muscles are healthy, our chances of not having diabetes we're protected. If muscles are healthy, our blood lipids are more stable. So I'll stop rambling at this point and just say, as we look at things like fasting blood glucose, insulin sensitivity, that starts in muscle. As we look at lipids in the blood, triglycerides, free fatty acids, that's all centered in the muscle. So if we balance our diet and balance our physical activity correctly, then all of those other metabolic things fall into place. And that's what Gabrielle and I always refer to as muscle centric health, but it's also sort of protein centric diets.